I usually start off with this particular slide just to establish my credibility on the subject. Now, the reason I have so many of these, and believe me, I've got red ones and blue ones and white ones and purple ones. I've got paper certificates and wooden plaques. I got plastic trophies and glass trophies. And the real reason is not so much that I'm a great photographer, but I've been doing this for a long time. Now, I have a lot that I want to share with you tonight in the next 50 minutes, but fear not, I have a plan. I'm going to show you a few examples of how long I've been doing this. I've been making composites before they invented Photoshop. I'm going to show you how we did it the old way. I want to talk about creativity as a separate and distinct topic, distinct from composites. I'm going to show you where I get subject matter and why I choose the logic behind my subject matter, and some of the mechanical parts of a composite, and how I think composition plays into this as opposed to straight photography. And I promise not to mention the rule of thirds, by the way. And finally, I'll give you some shooting tips if you're actually going to shoot for composites. Okay. This particular image is about 45 years old, and I've included it because it's the very first composite I ever made. 45 years ago, I was shooting black and white film, and I was developing it myself and printing. And the way we did it, I had this youngster pose outside his house with his arms up in the air. I walked around the side of his house and I photographed his mother's Volkswagen. I made a 16 by 20 print of the youngster. I made a 16 by 20 inch print of the Volkswagen. And with a razor knife, I cut out the Volkswagen, and with Elmer's glue, I put the Volkswagen print on top of the youngster. I rephotographed it, redeveloped the film, and reprinted it. And by today's standard, it's not very good, but that's how it was done. It was done physically, like cutting and pasting. This is layers, a two-layer composite before Photoshop. This is one of the few images in the presentation I can actually date. It was basically the day after my 40th birthday. I would make this about 37 years old. I had some acquaintances come over, and they brought some gag gifts. They were wrapped, of course, in black wrapping paper, because we all know it's all downhill after 40. Anyway, I tore them open. We had a good time, and I tossed them aside. And the next day, when I came down to clean up the place, lo and behold, I had some portraits on the table where I threw the paper, and I looked through the hole in the paper, and this was staring back at me. And I said, wow, that would make an image. So I took the portrait, laid it on a copy stand. I took some of the black wrapping paper, laid it on top, and I tore it to my satisfaction. And I photographed it, developed the film, and I printed it. Now, this is a two-layer composite with the black wrapping paper on top. Today, I would do it in Photoshop. Then I wondered about that particular technique. How far can you take it? And I ended up making this one as well. I had the young lady pose in this position with her arm up. And I developed the film, and I made two prints. I made one print the traditional straight way, a positive print, the kind of print we're accustomed to looking at. And then, through a trick in chemistry, I was able to make another 16 by 20 negative image. So I had a 16 by 20 paper negative and a 16 by 20 paper positive. I put the paper negative on top of the paper positive. I tore it back to expose her face. And with a little piece of two-faced tape, I taped it under a hand. I rephotographed it and reprinted it. So again, this is a 2-layer composite before Photoshop. One last example of the old way. Had the model pose in this position. I took a piece of picture frame glass, laid it on top, right in the copy stand, and with a gentle tap of a ball peen hammer at strategic locations, cracked the glass, and I rephotographed it and reprinted it. So this is basically a 2-layer composite, one with the glass and one with the print below it. Now, let me give you some concepts and creativity that you can apply to images you already have in your file. You don't even have to go out and take pictures to make creative images. And the first one is to apply a filter. It's the simplest action you can take to change a traditional image into a creative image, whether you're using Elements or Photoshop or some other software. But basically, you go to filters and you get a drop-down menu and a slider or two, and you slide them around to your satisfaction. Here's an image pretty much as I took it. So I did put the lightning in up at the right, but this is pretty much the straight image. And all I did to this to make it qualify for the creative category was to open up Photoshop Filter Gallery, and I applied the watercolor filter. I mean, if you were a judge in a competition, which one of these has more impact? And especially because this qualifies for the creative category. You can take the same image and apply a different filter. Here's the same image, and this one is the Fractilius filter.
What?
And the Fractilius filter.
Okay, okay.
It's not in Photoshop, it's an add-on. If filters aren't enough for you, and there must be, I never counted them, there must be 24 in Photoshop. But you can take another concept by basically subtracting or adding some color to an image you already have to get the viewer to put his or her eyes right on the subject matter you want them to look at. Here's an image as I took it. Nice enough calendar shot, but pretty flat. So I took it, and in Photoshop, I added some color. You can judge for yourself which of these have more impact. Here's an image here that's got a bit of light out of a Boca Grande, and I took this image and I subtracted color. And I only left those items colored that I wanted the viewer to look at. I also threw a texture on this, which is another trick. But the point here I wanted to show is that just taking images you have and adding or subtracting color really make a difference. This is a yacht club, and I subtracted the color from everything except what I wanted you to look at. And your eye just gets drawn right down that row. If that's not enough for you, adding or subtracting color, learn to change up the color. And in particular, change up the color of something everybody is familiar with. We live in Florida. We all know flamingos are pink. Here I have a blue flamingo, which basically I got the idea, by the way. I was in a tavern called the Blue Flamingo when I got this idea. It catches your attention, it draws the viewer in, and it keeps them. Once you learn how to change the color of an object, you can make it multicolor. Here we have a paisley flamingo. These take a straight shot and make them qualify for the creative category in the FCCC competitions. Now here's an old trick I used to do when I used to shoot black and white. I used a razor knife at the time. I now use Photoshop. But basically, take an image you have, cut it up, and reassemble it. Here's a portrait I took of two young ladies in their dance costumes against a white background. Now, the original was nice enough, and the parents loved it. But here I cut it up, reassembled it, not quite exactly right, but it makes the image much more interesting. They love this one as well. This one is really dated, and I can see now, looking back, this would even be a better image if instead of making the 4 images where the surfer is located, if I had made that an 8x10 instead of a 4x6. And that's what I really should have done. But basically cut it up, put it back together, and rephotograph it. The razor knife, that's how you would do it.
Did you try doing those in color?
No, but they are in color. They are color image. It's a color image, yes. I have not tried this in color. But next time I do it, I'm going to make that an 8x10 where the surfer is instead of 4x6. That's where your eye would go if you did that. Oh, this is down at Fort Myers. I cut this. I was waiting for guests to arrive. Took an image of the airplane. That's the one she was on, by the way. And she arrived at the gate. I did this in Photoshop. I basically cut it up. I reassembled it, not quite in the right order, but it makes the image much more interesting and much more creative. A simple concept to apply to any image you have, almost at random. This actually is a variation of cutting them up and pasting them back together. This is the same image twice. It's reversed and then butt-ended with each other. Probably San Francisco probably doesn't have a traffic problem today, but I bet sometimes they wish they had 2 bridges, one in each direction. This is one I did do in Photoshop, but I also did it before they invented Photoshop. I would make 2 prints, 2 16x20 prints, and with a razor knife, I would slice one horizontally, one vertically, and I'd do a little basket weaving, lay it on a background of my choice. I'd rephotograph and reprint it. But today, I do it in Photoshop.
Really like that one. Very nice.
Yeah, it's a little different effect, and can do it with or without Photoshop. It's great. Adding a texture is a favorite process of mine. And I would say add a texture or add an overlay. Now this is a pan wifey's used for 50 years to make chocolate chip cookies. And it's developed a bit of a texture on the pan, probably from the oven overheating. I'm not sure how that works. But if you take a close-up of the pan, it looks like this. Well, I took a portrait of a young lady, and in taking the portrait, I try to make it more interesting by tilting the camera. But if you take the pan and you overlay it on the lady, on the portrait, it makes it even more interesting. So this is an example of an overlay on an image. It's basically 2 layers, and we merged the 2 layers in this case with multiply. Anyway, here's took this out in Charlotte Harbor one day. Nice enough calendar shot by itself. Here's the chart you use to float around in Charlotte Harbor. Shows all the depth. By the way, if anybody got one of these, that data is 40 years old. Not very accurate. Anyway, I took the chart and I overlaid it on my boat image to create more of a storytelling power with that image.
That's my neighbor's boat.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll sell him a copy. How's that? Yeah, I'll send it to you and you can send it to him.
Okay, he'd love that.
Okay. Now, those were overlays. You can overlay one image on top of the other and mix the 2. Yes. Now, this is a subject matter we all have available This one happens to be out in front of my house. And I took this next image, this bird, on a Photo Adventures field trip years ago. It was done up at Jungle Gardens in Sarasota. It's a children's zoo, but they have a great parrot exhibit. Anyway, I took the parrot, and then I took that palm leaf, and I applied it over this parrot as a texture. Now, applying it as a overlay, as a texture, is different than an overlay in that there is no color. There's only texture. Notice there's no green from the palm leaf. Only it adds depth to the image. Now, that's another thing you can do to images you already have. And probably the biggest one that I engage in myself most is to change up the background. Everyone here has winning images in their files already they've taken. Unfortunately, they were not taken in the right place or at the right time. You know, you ran across an antique automobile in the Publix parking lot. Great shot. Unfortunately, there's shopping carts and automobiles parked next to it, and storefronts in the background. Think of changing up the background in any image you currently have. This is one of my favorites. I went to an airplane museum. Anybody been in Connecticut? This is at the Bradley Air Museum. You step in the front door, and they have this long hallway. It must be, 40, 50 feet long before you get to the ticket booth. And all the way down the hallway, hanging from the ceiling, are these model aircraft. They have wingspans, 15 inches wide, some of them 7 or 8 inches wide. You can see them in the bottom there, and if you look closely, you can see the string. Anyway, I do photography as a hobby. I'm not really selling my images or anything. I'm chasing ribbons. Well, this image has zero value in a competition. It's not going to win anything. The background's distracting. The image is static. And what I did to win a ribbon with this image is to change the background. I did a little trick spinning the prop and pulling off the landing gear. But the big thing I did was change the background. It takes an image that's not worth anything and turns it into a ribbon winner. This is that same aircraft, just from a different angle and processed a little bit differently. Basically, change the background. Well, you always exit the museum through the gift shop. So, bought a plastic model airplane, glued it together, and there's an image of it sitting on my golf cart seat. Well, this isn't going to win anything in a competition, but if you change the background, it produced a ribbon for me as well. All right. Here are a few zebras from the Tampa Zoo. And if you've been up to that zoo or any zoo and try to photograph pretty much the zebras, the backgrounds are horrible. They've been in those pens for so long, there's not a blade of grass. They've stomped them to dust. And the backgrounds are busy. Anyway, I changed up the background to a nice clean gradient. I used the gradient tool in Photoshop, made my own background, and laid them down. Turned into a winner. Trust me, the originals aren't worth anything. Well, Mike might like this one. This is in territory that you regularly visit. This is a Bayshore Drive here in Port Charlotte. There's a children's playground in that stretch of park. And in the playground is this life-size, actually I think it's bigger than life-size, fiberglass cow. Well, this is pretty much as it's shot. It's worthless in a competition. We've got a light bulb going out of its background, out of its back. We've got palm trees growing out of its head. Nothing is going to happen score-wise with this image. I changed up the background, and it won me a print of the year competition just by cleaning up and changing the background. So that's a concept you can apply to images you already have. Now, the question I get when people see my work for the first time, the primary question I get is, where do you get these ideas? Well, I don't really think I'm all that creative. I play a game and I do idea surfing. I get on the internet and I visit photography sites. We all do that from time to time. And every once in a while, an image pops up that speaks to me. And I say, wow, well, wow, how do you do that? And when I see those kinds of images, I download them and I put them in a file. And I have a file, see it down on the right side, called Pictures to Make. And when I have a dry spell and I can't think of an image for the upcoming competition, I open it up and I scroll through it for ideas. And this is a screenshot of images I have in that file that I've seen on the internet from time to time that spoke to me. And someday I'm going to make an image similar to one of each of these. I was on the internet and I saw this and I said, wow, that's cool. Well, I made this one. That's mine. I was on the internet. I saw this and I made this one. So generally, I end up improving on the original one that I saw. I saw this one and I made that one. I saw this one, and I made this one. Likewise, I saw this, and I made this. Now, this one has an interesting story behind it. I saw this, and I said, wow, I like that creature. I don't know what it is. I don't know how the maker made it. I don't know if it's a painting. Is it a plastic toy? What is it? But I like the creature, and I would like to photograph one someday. I'll make one for one of my images. But I couldn't figure out if the maker was so good that he could make this creature, why does he have the flowers growing out of his butt? And why does he have that hot spot up on the left-hand side if he has these skills to make this thing? Anyway, I downloaded it and it sat in my Pictures to Make file for, who knows, 3-4 years. And one day, I did take an image. I took this image. And I said, wow, this reminds me of something, but I don't know what. Eventually, I figured it out. And I pushed the pixels around until they ended up looking like this. Not quite like the creature I saw, but I'm on my way. And that's the process I go through when I make some of my images. Now, when you build a composite, you really simply need two pieces, a minimum of two pieces. The first one you need is a background, basically a place for your story to take place. And I have a folder full of images of backgrounds, just empty places. And you need a subject or two subjects, a primary subject and a secondary subject, and hopefully one that is eye-catching and interesting. Here's an image. It was taken in the Ringling Museum up in Sarasota. I stepped into the room. There was nobody in there. I took the image. I've never used this image for anything yet, but I can tell you someday something's going to happen in this room. I don't know what. Might be zebras in here. Might be skeletons. I don't know. The only thing I do know is Ringling probably won't approve of whatever goes on in here.
How about a trapeze?
There you go, trapeze. That would be good. That would rattle them. Anyway, here's another background image. It's worthless as a competition image by itself. But then on a Photo Adventures field trip up to the Englewood Airport, they're flying. The local radio control airplane club had a booth there, and they were trying to get membership drive. And they had some of their works on display. I got this photograph, and it just seemed like a natural for me to put it here. So you need a background image, and you need a subject. This is the Cocoa Beach on the other side of the States, directly across from us. Happened to catch it on a cloudy day. Well, if you cross the road, come off the beach, and you cross, I think it's Route 1 or A1A, I'm not sure, off the beach, and you go into the lobby of the La Quinta Hotel, they have a full-scale astronaut right by the check-in desk. I couldn't resist it. It's quite heavy, by the way. I tried to rotate it and shoot it from the back, but I couldn't move it. Anyway, shot it from a few different angles. And you find yourself a toy spaceship. You put the astronauts in the spaceship on the beach, and you have an interesting image. For those of us who have driven down Vermont Road, you probably said to yourself, boy, there's nothing to photograph out here. Well, I stopped, and I shot background images. What do you imagine happens on Vermont Road in the middle of the night? I don't know. The dinosaurs come out. Another variation. Dinosaur came out. I pasted in an antique truck. And you'll find when you start making compositions that you end up with variations of the same image. Usually I may end up with variations anywhere from 3 to 8. And then picking out the best one's always a problem. Now I have a personal preference for adding attention-grabbing elements. I like leprechauns and clowns, aliens, ghosts and what have pirates in my images, because it's not something the judges see every day in their when they're judging. And just by the shock value, it captures them. They start looking, what is this? How do you do this? And now you have him really looking at your image. Well, I've had my career and I'm retired. I'm doing nothing but chasing ribbons right now. But if during my working career I had my dream job, I would have been special effects director for MGM Studios. And if I had that job, I would have had a budget. I would have had a crew that could build me life-size mechanical dinosaurs to photograph. I would have had a budget for models and makeup artists to make that model look like an alien. I would have had a budget for costume designers, and I would have had a budget for seamstresses to make those costumes. Well, I don't have that kind of budget. So where do I get my elements, my subject matter for my images? Well, I'm going to show you a few places. You know, I bet most of us haven't been into the toy department in any store in a long time. But today, they make these resin figures for the kids to play with. This is a dinosaur, a pretty realistic looking dinosaur. And he's at Hobby Lobby in Northport, by the way. If you need him, if he hasn't been sold. It's a $16 dinosaur. And I photograph them right on the shelf, unless I really have an image I'm working on and I need them, in which case I purchase them because I never know which angle I'm actually going to use them in. This young lady was actually made of porcelain, some sort of ceramic, and she was on the shelf in an antique store up in Arcadia. Very realistic looking, and I said, she is going to have a place in one of my images. Now, when I shoot in these places, if it's a big box store, I just go ahead and do it. If it's a mom and pop place, I usually ask permission. Occasionally, I'll move a subject from one shelf to a higher shelf that has better lighting. Lighting's always a problem in these places. And I always push the price tag around so I have the minimum amount of cloning to do. These fish, by the way, in Punta Gorda, they're in Fisherman's Village in one of the tourist gift shops. You might be surprised, I don't know how many of you have been into, what's that tractor store? Tractor Supply? I think it's Tractor Supply.
TSC.
Yes, yeah, right there on Kings. This one happens to be in Kings Highway. But they have an amazing supply of realistic-looking farm animals, but grazing animals from Africa as well, elephants and giraffes and the like. Now, my advice, on shooting, if you're going to make an image and you want an elephant in it, and you stumble across an elephant at Tractor Supply, shoot it from every angle you can. As photographers, we're always shooting animals and people from the front so you see their eyes. But you never know how you want to use it in an image. You might want the profile, you might want it walking away from you. So I recommend you shoot it from the front, you shoot it from the back, you shoot it a little high looking down and a little low looking up. Now we'll give you some choices of creatures to use in your images. We saw this guy out on Vermont Road. He was in Hobby Lobby. Now, when I'm making compositions, I think of three styles. I think I have one subject that's basically in the center or near the center of my rectangular frame. And here's an example. This is the little girl I put on the motorcycle. I shot the motorcycle. I shot the young lady posing on a bicycle. And then I pasted her onto the motorcycle. That is the finished shot. And that's my composition. Basically, it's one subject in a rectangular frame. Here, I used her again. She's climbing on the monkey bars. By the way, for this shot, I had to stand on top of the monkey bars. It was a little shaky up there. Anyway, got a shot from a high-rise down. And it took me a long time to find this flag, this third element, a flag that I could shoot from the top down. When you walk around, you're looking for pieces of an image. You always see flags, and you're looking up at them. Anyway, I finally found one I could shoot from upward looking down. You paste the three of them together. That's what you get. It's a single subject in a rectangular frame. The second composition is basically two subjects. Mostly I try to stay away from this because your eyeballs end up playing ping pong. You look at one subject, then you look at the other, and you go back and forth and back and forth. This would be an example. Got the light bulb, and I got the strange face. And I've lightened up the eyes. So when this image comes up, your eyes look at the light bulb, they look at the eyes and face, and they go back to the light bulb, back to the face, and you end up playing visual ping pong. I tried making this. This is another two-subject image where your eyes travel between the two subjects, back and forth, back and forth. If you get, by chance, two subjects and you get them close enough together, it's almost like having a single subject. If you can see both, in this case, the automobile and the spaceship, without moving your eyes back and forth. Now, my favorite composition is usually three subjects, and I have one of two styles I use. One is a triangular formation, where your eye looks at the main subject, then each of the secondary subjects and back to the main subjects, and occasionally I have the main subject close to you and two secondary subjects that draw your eye further and further into the frame. And here's some examples of that. Here's a triangular composition. Originally, when I made this image, I did not have this alligator in here. And then I realized, gee, there's all that dead space, nothing going on down there. So I put the alligator in, and this is how your eye travels in the image. Yes, this is another triangular composition. This truck, by the way, is on Route 776 in Englewood. It's at Good Times Charlie's. And let's see, that diner in the background is down in Fort Myers, yes. Anyway, this forms a triangular composition. This one also, essentially, I attempted to form a triangular composition to keep your eye in the frame. And there are those fish from Fisherman's Village. Now here's the other style of composition I use, where the main subject is closest to you, and the other subjects draw you further and further back into the frame. They go that way. Now, if you're starting from scratch, you have an image idea, and you're shooting the pieces of an image, it's easier to shoot as much of it as you can, as opposed to processing it in Photoshop. And here's an example. I came around this curve one day. Actually, I went around it at night, and I thought to myself, boy, it's dark and lonely out here. This would be a great place to get an image of an automobile vehicle coming around the curve on a foggy, rainy night. So I stopped and I shot it. Well, it took me a while, but I eventually stumbled across the vehicle I thought I wanted in the image. This was over at the Civic Center on the Punta Gorda side. Well, it seems like a simple enough task when you're making a composition, a two-piece composition, cut the car out and paste it on the road. And then with a cheap Photoshop trick, you can turn it to night and make it rain. Turning it to night really is one click, and making it rain in Photoshop is about 3 clicks. However, if you look at this image, we still have a very distinct shadow under the vehicle, and you can see details in the trees. In fact, that tree stump or the trunk of that palm tree on the right side is a light color. You can see it all the way up. That is not the way you would see an image at night. And when you're making compositions, you got to think of how would it look. Well, I could take a couple hours in Photoshop and darken down all the details in the trees. I could get rid of the shadow under the car. But it's so much easier to go back and shoot it on an overcast day. Then when you paste the automobile in and make it rain, it's more believable. It's not quite totally believable, yeah, even though I've removed the shadow and it's cloudy and it's raining, but the street is still dry. Well, I have to tell you, I don't know how I would make the street look wet. I'm confident it would take me hours in Photoshop. It's easier to shoot it. Go back and shoot it when the street looks like you want it to look. Then when you paste it in, remove the shadows, it looks more correct. Looks more believable. So sometimes it's easier to shoot the pieces than it is to manipulate them. Now, when you're shooting for composites, my advice is keep the same perspective, use the same focal length lens, and the same lighting conditions between your shots so the pieces will mate when you cut and paste them together. Now, never say never. I'm sure there's a shot out there someplace where you took the background image with a long lens and you took the subject with a wide angle lens and they'll go together. But mostly they won't. Try to keep these 3 elements the same between the shots. You know, if you shoot the background at an upward perspective or a downward perspective, you need to shoot the subject with the same perspective. Last summer, we were heading north. We were on the highway. We were still in the sun, but I could see up ahead a very dramatic sky. We were going to run into some bad weather. And by the way, observe I shot this from the passenger's side. I do not shoot and drive, nor do I text and drive at the same time. Anyway, I shot this at a horizontal perspective, straight out, from a sitting position. Well, I came back in the fall, and I was over to Punta Gorda, and they were having an auto auction. I ran across this vehicle. Well, I shot this vehicle from a standing position, and you know that. I'm not very tall, but you know that because you can see the top of the hood. If I was sitting in a lawn chair and shot this, you wouldn't see any of the top of the hood. I also shot this like a three-quarter portrait that I would take rather than from the front. So if you paste that image in for the background image, it doesn't look right. It will never look right. I can go to Edit, Transform in Photoshop and push and shove this thing around. But trust me, it's going to take me hours, and it ain't never going to look right. That evening, we did run into rain. I found this in the parking lot of the motel we stayed at, and I shot it from a horizontal perspective, just like I shot out the window of the passenger seat horizontally. And if you paste this one in, it looks much more believable. This, by the way, is a passing situation you never want to get into. I think even if you slow down, you're not going to be able to slow down. Something else to consider when you're shooting for composites is Main Street, USA, 10:30 on a summer morning. The sun is high on the right side, and we know that because we have a shadow on the street from a tree. Well, if you shoot another subject at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and the shadow comes from the other side, you cannot paste the subject in that has the shadows. You can't have a light source, two suns. We're on another planet here if we have shadow coming from the right and shadow coming from the left. Now, I could take care of that shadow, but I made this up to show you need to consider shadows when you're shooting for composites. Scale. One thing I really personally love about composites is when you're shooting traditional photography, the size and scale of the subject matter in your image is dictated to you by the laws of optics. It's dictated by the focal length you're using and the distance the subject is from the lens. But when you're making composites, you are in charge of the scale. You can make big things small and small things big. You can create some really interesting images just by changing the scale of the subject matter. This is a plastic toy horse, probably about 4 or 5 inches tall. There's a young lady sitting on a motorcycle kind of contraption, and she's about 3 feet tall. There's no reason you can't cut her out and paste her on a 4-inch horse. You are in charge of the scale when you make composites. It's wonderful. It's just another fun aspect of the whole thing. Now, I have a lot of ribbons and certificates because over time I have learned what gets me the few extra points I need to get the ribbon. And the biggest one for me is impact. And I get impact by using unusual subject matter and primarily scale or perspective, and occasionally maybe a little oversaturation. Now, creativity, if you look at the rules for the FCCC creative competition, you can make an image of a leprechaun under a toadstool, under a mushroom. It comes up on the screen. Everybody knows it's not real, but you're going to earn points if it looks real. If you can technically pull it off so that it looks real, the subject matter does not take away any points from it. Composition. I have one goal with composition: keep it simple and keep the viewer's eye in the image. Keep it simple. Don't have busy backgrounds. And I always try to do something unusual to engage the viewer, show them something they haven't seen before, be it sharks underwater, or spacemen on a planet. It just, when that image pops up, I want it to be something the judge hasn't seen before. I want to have him sit up and say, ooh, what's this? How did he do this? And now he's thinking about my image. Lastly, if by some chance, I don't know how it could happen, but if by some chance my images did not inspire you, let me send you to look at the portfolios of a few photographers I follow. Probably. It'll explain why I am the way I am. Anyway, Denny Patunga. Google pictures by Denny Patunga. He's got a great portfolio. These are some of his images. When I see his pictures, I say, whoa, I want to make one. I want to make something like that. That's wonderful. Another person I follow is Adrian Sommerling. And he does a lot. I come from basically, I shot a lot of children's portraits in my day. And he kind of specializes in kid portraits. And these are a few of his images. I like to see it whenever he cranks out a new one. Leave that there in case anybody noting it. If you really want to go off the deep end, Google surreal photography on Pinterest. They have some pretty bizarre images up there to inspire you, even by my standards. I could make some of these, but these are like, these are really, really weird. And another fellow is johnlund.com. I love these images. I'm waiting to shoot an elephant sitting on a bike. I love that image. I would love to make that image. I need the staff to build me a mechanical elephant. Anyway, pretty much that's my story, and I'm going to stick to it. And I'm going to sign out here. Hope you enjoyed it.
Wow, great.
Great job.
Nice job, Bernie.
Yeah, super.
Excellent, Bernie. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so is there anything else we need to touch base on before we close out?
I have a question for Bernie.
Yes.
When you're in like the Hobby Lobby and you see these little dinosaurs, do you always have your big camera, or do you use your iPhone, or what?
I use my big camera. I do not carry my tripod. I do not bring my studio lights, and I don't block the aisle, and I don't recommend we make it a field trip. I'm unobtrusive. But I've never, in all the years I've been doing this, I've never been questioned. And like I say, once in a while, I'll pick up the toy dinosaur from the third shelf down below and put it up on the top shelf because the lighting is a little bit better. I have walked over to stationery and got a big white envelope to put behind it. So it'd be easier to cut out. But put them both back. And occasionally I purchase an object if I really want it for an image, because you never really know if you want it walking away from you. Anyway.
Thanks.
Okay, so 2 weeks from tonight, we'll meet again. We'll go over images. I think with a smaller audience, we can take up to like 5. And slideshows, we can do those. They just need to be sent to me in MP4 format. And if you have questions about how to get them to me, just send me an email. But we can do slideshows on this Zoom format. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Actually, if it's any easier, couldn't we each share them from our own computer? That might even make it easier. Would it make it more complicated? I don't know.
Yes, it would. It's a learning curve, and so we just kind of have to work up to it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So if you think about it, it took, and you and I had practiced this, the other day, and it took, 7 or 8 minutes for you to get up and running. If we have to do that with everybody, then, we're adding another hour to the meeting.
Yes.
Might just be easier to send them to me and I can display them. Okay, so anything else? John, anything you have?
This went very well. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. And thank you for doing it, Mike. And thank you, Bert. Excellent.
Well, I gave it 16, and that's about how many we had last time. So if you talk to anybody else who's in the club who's not joining us, tell them it's easy to do, and I'm happy to walk them through on how to get on if they're not sure about it. So thanks for everyone, and we'll